My name's John Tennell. I just got back from a trip to Kenya, Africa, and I posted pictures and videos on Facebook, and everybody's like, hey man, let me take you out to lunch and you can tell me the story. And rather than me telling 3,000 of you individually the story, I figured I'd just make a video and then everybody in the world can watch it and they can all be like, that's what John's trip was like. So first of all, where we went, we were gone for 16 days and it was a church trip. So we went there on what some people are calling missionary tourism, which basically means that, you know, we're doing touristy things too, like we're getting to see beautiful things, but we're also doing, you know, some mission work. So anyway, the place that we went was near Nairobi, and that's in Kenya, and Kenya is on the eastern side of Africa. I'll put a map up so you can see it. We were 1 degree below the equator, so real close to the equator, but because of the elevation that we were at, we were above 6,000 feet, then the temperature was very comfortable. So it was like 50s to 80s, and it was windy at night, but it didn't really matter. So it was a beautiful, beautiful country. The terrain was, in my opinion, gorgeous. There was mountains, and there was savanna, and there was acacia trees everywhere, and the terrain, in my opinion, was just absolutely beautiful. On the first day, we landed in Nairobi. We got there, we spent the night in a hotel. The next morning we woke up and we went to this elephant orphanage, and these elephants had lost their mothers due to either poaching or starvation. And so they took those elephants in because they were still nursing, you know, they had to rely on their mother's milk. And so they actually feed these elephants elephant milk. I don't know how they get it, but they do. The elephants are very comfortable around human beings, and so we just basically pet them and touch them, and they were right there, like you could just reach your hand out and touch them. And there was lots of them. It was really a cool experience. So then we went from there to a giraffe place that had a bunch of giraffes, and I like to call it Giraffic Park. It's not actually called Giraffic Park, but I think that's funny. And we could basically feed the giraffes, touch them. They don't like to be touched, but you can accidentally touch them, but they will headbutt you. And
that's how it's done.
We put food in our mouths, and the giraffes ate the food right out of our mouths, and it looks like the giraffes are kissing us, but really it was nothing serious, so don't worry, ladies. Me kissing this giraffe is not a threat to you. As if anybody cares. All right, anyway, so then we drove from Nairobi over kind of a mountain pass, if you will, not a big mountain pass, but still a mountain pass. And something that we noticed right away was that even on, you know, basically the biggest road across Africa, it was just like a 2-lane road. So there's one lane going one way and one lane going the other way. Of course, they drive on the left side of the road, which is distracting enough for us. But then on top of that, these are very narrow roads, and there's very wide 3-axle trucks everywhere that were going ridiculously slow. And so everybody's trying to pass each other all the time, and there's like a drop off on one side. And these drivers were just very comfortable with it, like, this is how you pass, and this is okay, and this is perfectly normal. And the people on our bus didn't think it was quite as normal, but after a while you get used to it, and just every once in a while you think, is this the time I'm gonna die and meet Jesus? Not this time, maybe next time, and we just continue our conversation. Anyway, so then we got to the orphanage. We spent most of our time at an orphanage called Naomi's Village, and it's a beautiful place. I'm going to kind of tell you a little bit more about that as we go. But the first night we got there, we kind of got settled in, got our luggage unpacked, and, you know, this is where we're going to sleep and that kind of thing. Here's orientation of here's the rules of what to do and not to do and how to treat people. And, you know, they really go out of their way to make sure that the children are protected and that nobody's accused and that you're never in a compromising situation. So it was important that we kind of laid the ground rules and we got that out of the way. Anyway, then that night we went and made s'mores for the kids. And we basically had a fire. They had a fire pit, and we got there, and I didn't know what to expect, right? Because, you know, I'm a grown man, I'm single, and I'm not around kids a lot, right? I'm not one of those gushy, like, ooh, kids, I love to see you, let me hold your baby, whatever. But, you know, so there's all these kids, and I just thought, well, I'm going to help out however I can help out, and, you know, I'll just stand back here and whatever, and there was none of that. As soon as I walked up, they run up and they swarm you. They love you right away, and they don't even care that you're, you know, feel weird about it or whatever. They don't care. So there was 85 orphans that lived there, and there were 17 of us, and I don't know what that math works out to, but basically everybody got swarmed by as many kids as could possibly get around them, and they call all the men uncle, and they call all the women auntie. And so they immediately learn your name, and they're just, uncle, 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 Uncle John, give me this, give me this, give me this. Oh, uncle, do a trick. Oh, can you eat a bird? Can you make it sound like this? Oh, can you do the splits? Can you? And they're just like, all up in your business, right? Like, they don't care what your problems are, because they just want to hug you and sit in your lap, and they would sit there and like play with my beard and just be like, oh, what's going on there? They play with my hair and touch my hair and be like, why does your hair feel like that? And they're very, very curious and very smart. Like, these kids were ridiculously loving, kind, smart, curious. It was a really cool experience. I'm not trying to gush on about this, but it was very cool. They made me feel very welcome. They clearly thought that my tricks were good and my jokes were funny. And that's a very important part of telling jokes, is that other people laugh at your jokes, and they did. And so that's a very important part. So I was grateful for that. Anyway, so the next day we got up, and they had a church service. They set some tents up out in the field, and they set up chairs and a little sound system, and they had their 8th anniversary for Naomi's Village being open for 8 years. So I was talking to one of the girls that works there, just kind of away from the crowd, and I said, what's your favorite part about working here? And she said, when we get a new kid. Because I know that that is a life that is going to be changed forever. And I remember when I got saved, I was a drug addict, and I was a dropout, and I had long hair, and I was wearing an Iron Maiden shirt. I was barefoot and 45 minutes late to church, and somebody drove me there just because they had free barbecue. And I ended up getting saved. And when I prayed with the pastor up front, afterwards he turned me around and he said, all the angels in heaven rejoice when even one sinner comes to repentance. And I can hear them shouting for joy for this young man right now. So come and welcome him into the kingdom of heaven. And then they did. Everybody in that church came, and they hugged me, and they shook my hand, and they gave me some encouraging word, some scripture, and they made me feel like I was a part of God's family. And that to me is a picture of what Naomi's Village is doing with these children, right? These children, we're not supposed to really talk about their stories, but they've come from some very difficult backgrounds. And most of them, both their parents have died for one reason or another, and they were in some pretty bad situations. And then when they call it coming home, when they come home, then they're actually adopted into that home. They're not sent out to be fostered out or just to be run through a system or whatever. Like, they become part of the family. So those 85 children and all the mothers and Bob and Julie and everybody, they're part of a family, and that's the way that they see them. Like, we're committed to you into adulthood. Like, you are our children. And to watch the way that they interact with the kids was absolutely beautiful, because they're very busy people. Not that they wanted to be busy, but they're important people. They have a lot of responsibility, and people come to them throughout the day and they say, we need to deal with this thing, and there's this problem or whatever. And when the kids come by, all that ceases. Like, you might as well just forget whatever in the world your problem was, because they're going to take a minute and they're going to love on each one of these kids for as long as they'll let them. And so as the kids come by, they would just you could see them looking into their eyes. You could see them like they genuinely care, and they genuinely love these kids. And I was moved by that. So as part of the service, as part of the celebration, the anniversary, then one of the things they said, they told the story, and it inspired me, so I made a bunch of videos, and you can actually look at those. They're on my YouTube channel, and they're on my Facebook as well, of Bob and Julie talking about how they got inspired to start Naomi's Village, and what kind of their mission is, and the story behind it. And it really is inspiring. I don't want to kind of eat up all this time for that, but it's definitely worth looking into. But Julie got up there, and she said, I love every one of you kids. I don't want you to feel like you're just part of a big group and I just love the group or whatever. Like, I love you individually. And she went through and told every one of them the date that they came and what the situation was when they came and how much that she loved them. And it was a really beautiful thing. So the next day, we went to an IDP camp. And an IDP camp, in case you don't know, because I didn't know, is an internally displaced people group. And so what that means is that there was tribal disputes. There's 43 tribes, I think, in Kenya, and one tribe gets it in their head that they don't like the other tribe, and so they would go and kill everybody in that tribe and just take their land, their houses, and their stuff. And then whatever remnant of people was left over, they would flee, and then the government would give them some displacement money, and they would give them, if I heard right, $2 or $3 per person so that they could find a new home. And so these people nobody can afford to get a home for $2 or $3, obviously, but if they got 20 or 30 or 50 or 100 families together and they all got that, then they could buy one small piece of land and then live there. And so that's what these IDP camps are. And they've been there for 10 or 12 years. And it's really just heartbreaking. And the amount of poverty that they're dealing with is something that we in America cannot comprehend. They basically got the land and they're like, great, we have a place to sleep on the dirt, under a piece of tin, under a tree, wherever it might be. And they had no clean water. They had, I mean, just like basic human things that we think, you know, this stuff, of course you're going to have this. Of course you're going to have running water and hot water and electricity and, you know, transportation and good roads and all this kind of stuff. Of course you would have that. And they can't even fathom how we would assume such a thing because, of course, they don't. What I found the most touching through all that was that even though these people had what we would consider to be nothing, right? We would look and say, how can you even survive? What they did have that we are impoverished in is they had faith and love and generosity and kindness that I also haven't seen very much in America. So these people, and as I kind of tell you these stories, you'll see what I'm talking about, but people with nothing and what you would assume would be zero hope, just no hope whatsoever, these people come to you and they say, may God bless you. They're moving their hands like this, saying, may God bless you, may God bless you, may he heap his blessings upon you, may God bless you so much. And they would sing this stuff to us as if we needed more blessings. And they were just, we'd come by and they'd say, oh, we're so grateful that you're here. God told me that the people that provided these water filters would come, and now here you are. Please sit down, let me tell you our story, let me welcome you, can I get you anything? And then whenever we left, they're like, how many of you are there? And they got eggs for us. Well, they don't have very much, but they wanted to make sure that each one of us had an egg. Now, we all have money. We're from America. Like, the stuff that we consider poor is not poor. And yet they, out of their nothing, generously gave to us. And their faith in the middle of all that, and their hope and their resilience through all of that, and just their genuine love was something that I don't see very often, and was very touching and very refreshing. So the IDP camp that we went and visited was called Mui, Hungary. And of course I'm white, so it's going to sound bad when I say it. I don't speak Swahili, but we met this woman named Grace that was there, and they've got these water filters that they've made that are basically 2 5-gallon buckets. I don't understand how the water filtration system works on the inside, but it does, and it purifies the water, and they're only like $40 a piece. So the next day, we went to Naivasha prison. Prisons in Africa, or at least in Kenya where we went, are different than prisons in America. We went, and the prison that we went to visit, there was 64, I believe, women and about 800 men. There was a women's side and a men's side. And of the 64 women, I think 8 of them had babies. Babies or toddlers. And if you're a woman in prison there, then your baby is also in prison with you. So there are 64 women and 8 babies on one side, and then 800 men on the other side. And about half of those men, it seemed like, were in plain clothes, and those were waiting trial, and then the other half were in black and white, and those were the convicted. We brought them, we got a good deal. We brought them a whole bunch of toilet paper, toothpaste, toothbrushes, feminine hygiene products, soap, a little bit of stuff to eat, and some toys for the babies. The reason that we brought that stuff to them is because that is not provided for you if you're in jail. So I'm not sure about all the details about how their life is in jail, but from what I could tell, I didn't see beds. They didn't have, obviously, toilet paper, toothbrushes, toothpaste, things that we consider very basic, unless their family, friends, or somebody like us comes in and says, here is this, stretch as long as you can. This was a medium security prison, which meant that it was 5-year sentences or less. And I asked one of the guards, what kind of things did these people do to get in here? And it was things like public intoxication, drunken fights, petty theft, things like that. It's not my place to judge how they do their prison system, but it was tough to be there and watch how that happened. So nevertheless, the guards were very open to us sharing the gospel with them, and they were very open to us speaking with them as a group. So the women sat on one side, and then all of us sat on the other side, and they had like a tin roof kind of a thing over them to block from the sun, and then we sat in some plastic chairs or whatever. And then one of our people kind of gave their testimony, tried to offer some hope, and said, you guys are in a real prison. At one point in my life, I was in a prison inside my heart, and Jesus set me free. And we gave them all this stuff, and then the same thing that happened, with the orphans, and the same thing that happened with the people in the IDP camps. They sang, "May God bless you, may God bless you, may God bless you so much." And they were trying to heap their blessings and heap God's blessings onto us that had so much more than they did. And that's a very humbling experience to have somebody who has nothing say, "I hope that God blesses you, and I want to bless you." Then we went to the men's side, and one of our guys said, James, who is a mighty man of God and a prayer warrior, somebody who I don't deserve to even be around. James got up there and gave his testimony and told how he had been on drugs and how he did all this cocaine and almost died, and they found God. And he was inside of a prison as well, and that these guys had hope. So one of our people asked the warden, can we all sing a song together? He misinterpreted, and he got a representative from the people in prison. That guy came out, and he started to sing this solo song beautifully, and the crowd sang along to some degree. He would kind of prompt them, and that's how the Swahili kind of worship works. But the translator told us that he was saying, "How long, God, until you deliver me? How long until you deliver us? Come and deliver us. Come and deliver us from this prison." And he was singing this, but deeply from his heart, and he sang it beautifully and with full enthusiasm. And the crowd was cheering, and then finally he stopped, and then the guard looked at Greg, who had asked the question, and he said, "Now are you going to come and sing? we sent our representative, now you send your representative." And Greg's like, we might have misunderstood each other. I meant we would all sing a song together. But then one of the people on our group has a beautiful voice, and so we sent Annie out there as our human sacrifice, and she sang Amazing Grace, and then we all together, almost 1,000 of us all sang Amazing Grace together. I thought it was beautiful that even though these people were criminals, and even though they were in prison, that they were very open to the gospel, that they were very open to, they were just kind. They were, in my opinion, they were beautiful people. And it was a very touching experience. We went the next day to a place called Kajibi, or it might have been that night, I don't remember. And Kajibi is another town. It's like a mountain village, and there's some pictures of Kajibi. And we didn't stay there, sorry. We went and we ate at the Sizzler's house. And so there's two couples that live basically kind of in one duplex, if you will, and they have a pizza oven out there, and we all kind of made our own pizzas, and we cooked and ate those pizzas. And while we were there, I noticed that this garden that they had was absolutely beautiful. And so I took several pictures. They had like a little water fountain thing that they had made with koi fish, and I know how difficult that is to do. And their landscaping was just beautiful. It's not something I have a strength in. So I figured out who was responsible for all this, and I went to him and I said, Steve, that your garden is beautiful. And he goes, oh, you can't really blame me, because the soil here, you just put anything in it and it grows. And I was like, well, let me just turn you around this way. That is not the same as what you have done. So although I appreciate your humility, it's false humility. You've done a great job. This is absolutely beautiful. And he kind of smiled, and I was like, I know that you're a superhero. And I kind of gave him a wink, like, whatever. Anyway, absolutely beautiful garden, wonderful people, very encouraging. I could sit there and listen to them for the rest of my life and not get tired of it. They're very inspirational, and just have a lot of insight that I think a lot of people need to hear. Okay, so then we went to Cornerstone School. So let me explain. Naomi's village is an orphanage, and what happened is over time, they were like, our kids are growing up and we need a school. And so they tried to send them out to other schools, but they were underwhelming. And so they were like, well, we can have our own school. And they did, like just in Naomi's village. But quickly they outgrew that. And then it became such a huge success that everybody in the surrounding areas was like, we want our kids to go to the school too. And so what they've done is they've got a whole system where they qualify kids, and this is for only impoverished children. And I mean like impoverished children that have no hope. And there's some parameters. They have to catch them at a certain age before they get completely malnourished, and it's kind of irreversible or whatever. But they've got just this beautiful school. And so we got to visit this school, and they kind of told us the story. I made a separate video about that, and you can take a look at that one. And he kind of explains some. I only filmed a little bit of it, of his explanation. But so school in Kenya is like 3 months on and 1 month off, and then 3 months on and 1 month off throughout the year. But the problem is that then these kids are not going to eat. Or they're going to eat very minimally, and they're going to be malnourished. And so they make excuses to have school on Saturday, or to have things during that off month, or to have some kind of extra activity, or some other learning things, or some other community development type of things, or whatever, so that the kids need to come in for whatever reason, which is also enriching in their mind as well, but it's an excuse to make sure that they get fed. And so they bring them in so that they can make sure that those kids get fed on a pretty regular basis, because otherwise, if they eat lunch on Friday, they probably won't really eat again until Monday morning, and they're okay with it, but they want to make sure that they have food, and so they provide food for them and all these other things, and it's really top notch, and it's really inspiring what all they do. Okay, so moving on. The next 2 days, there was a marriage conference, and I'm going to be honest with you, I've already been married and divorced twice, and I felt like what I had to offer would not be welcomed, and so I didn't want to poison the well, and so I snuck off and did something else. I did tell them that I was leaving, but I went to Lake Naivasha, and I got on a boat and went and looked at all these animals. And so it's a little kind of fishing, I don't know if you'd say it's a village, but there's definitely around the lake, there are people fishing all over the place, and then they take those fish out and they literally count them and put them in boxes, and some of them are still like flopping or whatever, and then they put them in a car and they drive them off to Nairobi. They export them, and there's flies all over it and stuff. And I was like, so are those flies on there? And they go, oh yes, it's very fresh. And I'd be like, is that fish still alive? They're like, oh yes, it's very fresh. It's a different world than what I'm used to, but who am I to criticize? I'm sure they cook all the germs out of it. Nevertheless, so I saw some beautiful wildlife around Lake Naivasha. I saw a lot of hippos. I saw water bucks. I saw impalas. I saw lots of birds, pelicans and whatnot, zebras, giraffes, just all kind of things. So part of Lake Naivasha is like a peninsula almost, called Crescent Island, and there was a movie called Out of Africa back in the 80s, and they filmed there, and so they brought all these animals in to Crescent Island. They filmed, they left, and they just left the animals. And so there's a very high concentration of all these exotic animals that have no predators whatsoever because they're on this island. And so it was pretty cool to sneak off and see that stuff. Anyway, I did come up for the tail end of the conference, and I had some really good conversations with some people, and I actually did learn some stuff there. And I think that, honestly, everybody else that was there that had something to offer, that actually has a good soul still left in them, it was a helpful thing for everybody, and there was a good exchange. So I'm not criticizing that. I just didn't feel like I had very much to offer. So then the next day, we had a field day at Cornerstone, and there was a couple that was so very excited about all the different things that we could do for these kids. And they spent so much time organizing it all, and they just really cared. And it was encouraging to get to be a part of that. I am a pretty lazy person, so they were like, you do this job? And I'm like, I'm happy to do it. But they did so much work. And so they were teaching people, the kids, how to use compasses and how to like navigate their course. And then they had different relay races going on, and how to build a tent and how to tie different kind of knots and just all kinds of things. They just organized this whole thing, and the kids really had a good time. And it was encouraging to get to see the kids interact with each other, and it was just really, it was a neat time for everybody, I think. So that night, obviously we're farther out than we're used to being in the Metroplex, and so they turned off all the lights in Naomi's village, and we got to see so many stars. And I wish I could have filmed it, and I wish I could show you pictures of it, or video or anything, but William, one of the guys on the trip, is a very, very smart person. I have a lot of respect for him. So he brought out a laser pointer that could shoot to the stars. I mean, it was unbelievable. And he pointed out all the different constellations and the stories behind them and how they interacted with each other, and like the story of the gospel and salvation through the constellations, which I had no idea about. And it was really a cool experience to get to see those, because in the city you look up and you're like, yeah, there's about 10 stars, there's a Big Dipper and there's Orion, and that's about it. But down there's a slightly different constellation pattern down there. We could see a different part of the universe, but it was really neat to see so many stars, and we could see part of the Milky Way galaxy. And of course none of that stuff shows up on a phone very well, but really fun time. I was really looking forward to that, and he did not disappoint, and God did not disappoint. It was a really, really beautiful night. I wish you guys could have been there. So anyway, the next day was another Sunday, and we went to a place called Church on the Tree, Church Under the Tree, and that is another IDP camp. And that one is a similar story to Mui Hungary, but it seemed like that was a bigger camp, and they were all living there but didn't have homes yet. And they decided, we want to build a church before we build our homes, because we got to make sure that we're right with God, and then everything else is going to fall into place. And they did. They built the church first, and they were just their worship and their attitude, their generosity, their kindness, their faith, and their hope was inspiring. And so Ron, the guy in charge of this whole trip, who did just an amazing job, and it was just a genuinely great guy all the way around, and an inspiration to me, and I'm sure to everybody else. He was kind enough to say, John, why don't you give the message at church this week? And I was like, no, of course, you go ahead and do it. He's like, no, I feel like you need to do it. And so I did, and I feel that God did speak through me and give them a message that they needed to hear, and it was a very good time. So then after church, there's all these kids. I think there was 7 men in the church service. There's probably about 30 or 40 women, and probably about 60 or 80 kids. And I didn't count them, but that's roughly what the ratio was. And all these kids, after the service, somebody had either donated or bought, or I don't know what, all these plums and eggs and different food, big, like farmers' bags full of this stuff. And so then we got to help distribute those to the kids, and you could tell that some of them were eating them right away because they were starving, and then some of them were trying to like sock it away so they could bring it back to their families or whatever. And it was really a beautiful thing to see. They're getting fed in real life and they're getting fed spiritually, but we're not acting like we're going to feed you spiritually and then leave your physical needs. We want to make sure that all that is filled, and so that was a really beautiful thing to experience. Nevertheless, so then we went and did a home visit the next day. So this one lady, her daughter goes to Cornerstone School, so she goes to the school because they were in such poverty. They do a lot of community development because they really do care about the community. And so they do microloans, and they loaned this woman $50. There's a fund for that. They loaned her $50. She took that $50, bought onions, had a small piece of land where her house was, started growing onions as a crop. As those grew, she harvested those and sold those and was able to plant more onions and so on and so forth. This has been going on for a few years now. Now she has 1.5 acres of onions. She has some people that work for her a couple days a week and harvest these onions. People come and pick them up. They sell them all around. And she's hoping that she can have 3 acres soon. And if she can have 3 acres, then she'll be able to send all of her children to school. And that is just a really big deal. And it's very inspiring because that's what they want. Is they're not trying to keep people in poverty. They're not saying we're going to punish you if you start getting out of poverty. Once you start the road, then they want you to do better as time goes on, and they encourage that, and they're still going to let the child go to school, and get fed and all of the things that go along with that. So it's neat to see these stories of hope where people had literally nothing and then are climbing their way out of that. So then finally, we wrapped up and we said goodbyes and things like that to everybody, and it was really a beautiful time. I mean, all the people that work at Naomi's Village, all the people that volunteer there, all the children, the people at Cornerstone, just all of them were just such an inspiration to me, to all the places that I visited. And then we got to the fun part of our trip, the tourism part of our missionary tourism, and we went on a safari in a place called Masamara, and it was absolutely beautiful. Like, if you get the chance, go and do it. So we stayed in tents, but I don't want you to get the wrong impression. These were beautiful tents. So there was poured concrete, there was tile, there was like a shower, there was beds, they had mosquito nets, they had electricity in them, they had lighting in them, but it happened to be tent material that covered the whole thing. And you would get your individual tent, and the tents were not small. I mean, these things were probably 10 feet by 20 feet with 10-foot ceilings or something. They were pretty good size. But it was in this oasis of a beautiful place. I mean, beautifully landscaped, trees everywhere, monkeys just running all around you. Not up in your business, but if you looked, you'd be like, wow, there's monkeys like literally everywhere. Then it was surrounded on 3 sides by a river, and this river, had a bit of a ravine or whatever. But down inside that river, there was crocodiles, and then there was hippos, like so many hippos. And you would hear them all night long, especially in the morning, coming back in, and they're making all these hippo noises, which I can't really impersonate very well. But anyway, so then several times we got to go out on an afternoon safari. So they had these Jeeps basically with no windows, and you could stand up in them and look out or whatever. And then they just had big open sides. They were off-road vehicles, and so we could go anywhere across this whole area. It was 150 square miles, and we could just drive anywhere across this land. And they had rivers, and they had trees, and they had this, savanna, and they had grasslands and all this stuff. And these animals were everywhere. I mean, like, they don't care about you at all. So we would pull up, and look out the vehicle, and 8 feet away from us, right there on the ground, with no glass between us, no door between us, nothing, there's a lion. And he's just like, and unless you startled him in some way, he wasn't going to bother you. But if he did startle him, he kind of looked up at you or whatever, then the driver would be like, we're going to go. But we saw lions up close. We saw hippos up close. We saw giraffes, so many giraffes, herds of them. I mean, I think I counted 15 at one time, but we just saw it. It got to the point where you're just like, I'm tired of seeing giraffes. We saw elephants, herds of elephants, baboons, all kinds of, I'm going to call them African lawnmowers. So grass eaters, right? So there's dik-diks, are very small antelope-looking things, and then there was impalas, and then there was elons, and there's several different sizes and shapes of these African lawnmowers, as I call them, but basically in the deer family. But then there's also, we saw a leopard, which is very rare and difficult to see, and once we saw it, we realized how difficult it was to see and why it was so rare. We saw a family of cheetahs. We saw, it was just unbelievable. So we did an afternoon safari. Then the next morning, me and 2 other people got up very early, and we did a hot air balloon. So we drove 2 hours across some of the bumpiest road ever. And we got in a hot air balloon, and then as it was rising, so was the sun, and we got to just see, we were just barely over the treetops, then like maybe 50 feet off the ground, and you just see all these animals all around, and we just like go over and go, oh, look at all those warthogs, and look at there's jackals, and there's hyenas, or whatever, and we're just floating, and it just felt like, just like nothing up in there. It was really breathtaking and really beautiful. A hot air balloon is a little bit expensive, about $450 American. Well, I don't even care. It was totally worth it. If you get the chance, go do it. Spend the money. The money's going to spend on something. Just go do it and enjoy yourself. Anyway, we landed. They had made breakfast for us, like out in the middle of the savannah. We ate, and we could look over, and there's an elephant over there, and then, giraffes or whatever. And there's people from all over the world. There's people from China and, England, Europe, whatever, and then us from America, obviously, and then them from Africa. And everybody just had breakfast together, and we all talked and stuff. It was a really neat experience. Then we did another afternoon safari, and then we did a night safari. And then the next morning we got up. We saw some animals in the morning too, but then we drove back to Naomi's village. We got to kind of say goodbye to everybody, spend a little bit of time there. We played some music, sang some songs, and kind of laughed and cut loose for a little bit, and then we began the long voyage home, and kind of debriefed a little bit. Overall, I guess some highlights that I want to tell you is that what we consider poverty in America is not poverty. I realize that it's all basically the same problem with some more zeros behind it, but I'm just telling you that what we take for granted, we look like jerks. Okay, that's the nicest way that I can say it, is the stuff that we take for granted and the stuff that they don't have, that they wish that they had, we look like real jerks. So that's one thing. Secondly, what they have to offer us in return. We always come over to Africa like, we're going to tell you how it is, and whatever. Like, we've got money and we've got answers, and we're going to fix you, which I think is a very arrogant thing to do. But they've got this mindset now that they have nothing to offer back, and I think that's heartbreaking. For somebody to feel like that is very demoralizing. And I made sure to tell them, especially at the church service, but individually too, that they do have something to offer us. Like, they have faith and hope and love. They have generosity and all kinds of things that we are severely deficient in. We are impoverished in those areas. And I don't know what everybody else felt, but to me, I felt like my bank got a little bit fuller in those things, just being around those people and witnessing how they did that. And it was inspiring to me. Also, I just want to say for the record that the media and TV and whatever gives us this impression that all these other countries are really dangerous and that everybody's out to kill us, and if you're an American, they want to kidnap you and take your money and beat you up and rape you or whatever in the world. I've been to a lot of countries, and I have not experienced this. I'm not saying that if you're out there drunk and you're floating, like, look at all this money, where do I spend it? And you're doing stupid things, and you're buying drugs, and you're getting yourself in trouble. Okay, maybe, yeah, right? And maybe I'm completely wrong, but everywhere that I've gone, I found that people are incredibly kind to us. They're generous. They're happy to see us. They're hospitable. They're kind. And I think that we need to focus more on our similarities than on our differences and stop letting everybody divide us, because I believe that if you actually go out there and see people, if you actually go out and see these different countries, see these different places, see these different people groups or whatever in the world, you'll realize that we have a whole lot more in common than we're letting on. And we need to not let all these things divide us, and let everything not just be a big competition of we're better than you or you're better than us, or what can we take from you or what can you take from us, but rather like, what can we give to you and what do you have in return, and how can we sharpen each other and make each other better. I think that if we would do that more, that the world would be a better place. I also want to say that I believe that every place, somebody asked me, what is your favorite place in the world? You know, because you get to travel all the time. And my answer is that every place has a beauty of its own. Even if you look and you're like, this is the most boring place or the most plain place. Everybody, when they're at home, thinks there's nothing to do here. But that's absolutely not true. Every place is beautiful if you take the time to look. If you have your eyes in the right place, if you're at the right perspective, the right vantage point, you're going to look and go, what a beautiful place. And every person, if you look at them, you'll look and realize in the right light, like, they're a beautiful person. And I get the honor of getting to be a part of their life and getting to learn something from them and take something away from this whole thing. And there are just beautiful people and there are beautiful places everywhere. And we need to appreciate those more. We need to appreciate that this stuff is all around us and not take it for granted and not be such negative people all the time, right? Not let all these things get us down and weigh us down, but just, you know, be a light in the world. Over there, they say, may God bless you, may God bless you, may God bless you so much. And they also, these orphans were singing, God has done so much for me that I cannot tell it all. And that touched me. That was, I think, the second day that we were there. They said that. These orphans were singing. It was a song that they were singing, but they sang it and they meant it. God has done so much for me that I cannot tell it all. And I feel that way too. And so I just want to cast my blessings on you, whoever's watching this video, that where there has been strife in your life, may God bring you peace. And where there has been difficulty in your life, may God heal you, may God bless you, may God bless you so much. Thank you guys for watching. I really appreciate it.